Gould.
Thank you, Mike. Can you hear me all right on this microphone? It's pretty cool. So thank you all for asking me to be out here this weekend. I've been asked a couple times and always have been busy, so I'm glad to finally make it out here. I am going to show you guys a little bit about the type of work that I make and focus more on the tool making. My business is kind of divided in two halves. On one half, I have production tools that I make and sell, and on the other half, it's more work that it's a little bit more artistic that goes into galleries and higher end, and that's more locksmithing and boxes and things like that. But the tools are really my bread and butter, and I really enjoy making them. And I went to college thinking I was going to be a graphic designer, illustrator at a Maine College of Art, and then found out that metals was a thing that people do, and so I took a class and was hooked, and that was a fine metals department, so silversmithing, coppersmithing, goldsmithing, and it was pretty quick right off the bat. I realized that I was equally as excited about the tools that I was getting to learn how to use as I was actually about the techniques I was learning. And I think a lot of us get into this and get really excited about tool making, and I'm no different. And so it was a few years later that I got to take a blacksmithing class and learn to make my first hammer. Andy Donor taught me to make my first hammer, and from there I took off and started doing some sculptural work, made these hammers that were on the wall, and the peens would be drawn way out and go all around them, and they were non-functional. But I started doing some functional hammers as well, and that really started me down the tool making path. And I guess to take one step back is I early on saw Tom Latney's hacksaw, and that was a real inspiration. I came back to my shop and made a hacksaw that works terribly, but after going to a school that was really pushing more sculptural work and more conceptual work, making that tool and just making something that would, well, it didn't function very well, but the idea of it functioning really well was so rewarding, and more rewarding than anything I'd felt all through school. So to this day, the tools that I make, I think I'm of the belief that when you use tools that you either think are really beautiful or that you respect because they have history, that it enhances your work and allows you to make better work. And so that's kind of why I do what I do and where I'm coming from. So this weekend, I was hoping to talk about some chasing hammer heads, do some forge a pair of dividers, and get into a couple of the forgings on a jeweler's saw. And then also hopefully get into a little bit more decorative work too, in terms of doing some filing and decorative file work and how I approach that. And also kind of I was thinking about packing my bag and how heavy it is, and thinking about smaller work, and most of the work I make is quite small. And I hope that maybe will bring something a little bit different to show you is punching smaller holes. I think, a lot of people start out making a 2 or 3 pound hammer, and that's a nice size to work with. But then when you start to scale down and you start punching holes that are a lot smaller and working on this smaller scale, I think, I just hope it's something a little bit interesting to see. So as I go through this chasing hammerhead, this is the same process I use for any hammer I make. I just was telling someone I have about 6 production hammers that I have that only go up to, this is about 100 grams, they go up to about 350 grams. So it ends up being, this is a quarter pound. 450 grams is a pound, I think. So everything's less than a pound, so they're pretty small. I make my own forging hammers and all that stuff too, but in terms of the work that I sell, that's what I do. So let's get started on this. Chasing hammers first. So when I'm going into making a hammer or a new tool, I guess a hammer in particular, I'm thinking about weight, how big I want the hammer to be. And a lot of times I will pick up a hammer that I like, find an old hammer. These chasing hammers in particular, these are super traditional in their form and their style. So I've looked at a lot of old ones and decided the sizes I like. And so I need to figure out the amount of stock that I'm going to use. And you can kind of do this in a couple of ways. A lot of times it's finding that hammer you like, figuring out how much it weighs, reverse engineering to get how much stock you need, or forging that hammer and seeing how it goes, seeing how that form turns out, and then making adjustments from there. So for this, we're going to use some 1045 round. Where'd you go? Here you are. I like to use 1045 for most of my hammers. it's a pretty medium carbon steel that heat treats just fine for any of the uses that these hammers are used for. I have a bench hammer, which is a real simple hammer, like square faces on either side, little decorative detail, 350 grams. And I just bought my first house and renovated it, and I use that hammer for everything. It's just been at my bench for the past years, but I was knocking out plaster walls, driving big crowbars, doing everything with it. And it's got a much different patina now than it did. But man, it held up great. It was awesome. I was really pleased to do that. And so I like 1045 because it's medium carbon steel, easy to heat treat, and when it comes to file work, it's a little bit lower carbon, is a little bit easier to file, I find. Like 4140 is another great steel for hammers. I find it a little bit harder to file. So that's kind of where I'm coming from when I use that. In terms of the mass of the hammer, so if we're looking to figure out the mass of our hammer, we can do that by figuring out the volume of the piece of steel. So in this case, we're using 7/8 inch round, and you figure out volume, you figure out volume, pi r squared, times the height of the material. That'll give you the volume. And then a cubic inch of steel weighs 0.2836 pounds. And so you can multiply it by 0.2836, and that will get you the weight of the hammerhead. And then there's another conversion to go to grams, of course. So I can reverse engineer that and say, I'm trying to figure out my height for this weight hammer and do that math. And I won't sit through that and make it a math lesson, but that's the idea behind it. Okay, so I know that for this 1/4 pound chasing hammerhead, I need 1.5 inches of this 7/8 inch round. Let's get this heating up, if you don't mind, or I can do this, or whichever. Oh, here.
Do you have like a filing allowance?
A filing allowance?
For polishing the face?
In terms of weight?
Weight,
Yeah, no. I mean, that's the thing, is with a lot of, and I feel like this is the mentality with a lot of contemporary thinking, is I say it's a 100-gram hammer, and 100-gram hammer. One's gonna be a little under, one's gonna be a little over. And same thing with their 7-inch dividers. You might get a 6 7/8 inch divider, or you might get a 7 1/8 inch divider. A lot of this work, and this goes to the weight as well, whether it be visually with details, with accuracy, is I look at it all as perceived precision. Is that
I shouldn't sew the case when I ordered the product.
you shouldn't pre-make the case? Yeah, I'd wait till you get it. Sorry. I haven't run into that with any customers yet, so. And I guess another thing, what I'm gonna do this weekend is I think I'll do everything by hand, although I didn't realize we had this hammer here, so that's cool, that's exciting. But I do have a power hammer that I use for a lot of things, and I've ended up, over the years, since I've gotten it tooled up to do a lot of this work. So like one of the first things we're gonna use is this bolster, which I made for the hammer, but I can totally use it at the anvil. So I think I'll probably just kind of touch on that. I'm not gonna be like, well, if I had my hammer, then I'd be doing it like this. But I just am trying to be honest about how I work. And I started out doing this all completely by hand before I had my power hammer. And so it's just been an interesting transition, and learning how to make different tooling for that, and being more efficient and being more accurate with the hammer. Not that you can't be super efficient and accurate at the anvil, but it's just takes a little, I don't know, it's different. It's different. And it's fun using power hammers, right? All right, what else do I need? Oh, and I guess so on that note is a lot of times, so when I know I'm gonna do a batch of hammers, a production run or anything like that, then I know the size of stock I need, and so I just cut a bunch of stock. Usually I order 2-inch round 1045, and then I can just cut all these hockey pucks. And the first thing I do is resize it, first heat, resize it to the block I need for that hammer. Not so with these. I don't do that with chasing hammers because it's smaller. I just buy that 7/8 inch round. That's a lot easier. But I will cut it off beforehand. In this case, I'm going to cut it off of the bar because it's a little bit easier to hold and everything like that.
Is the bar the diameter of the face, or do you?
Nope. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to neck it down, and then I use this bolster to upset the face. So I'm going for that middle ground. And that's with a lot of these forgings that you'll look at or see is like with the dividers, there's two different starting stock sizes. There we go. Two different starting stock sizes because I'm picking a material that's going to get me closest to the material first. And so that is because, in this case, is that this die has not very specific. It has perceived precision radiuses on it. It has radiuses on it to match what I want the radius to be here. Whereas if I were to do that, so I started out making it just out, I was like, oh, I want a face that's 1.5 inches wide or whatever, and so I'll just neck it down from that. But then, well, how do I cut it off when it's hot and not screw up that face that's so thin at that lip and everything? So this is what I came up with, and also when you neck it down like that, well, you could use like top and bottom fullers to get that right radius. But then again, how do you cut it off and not muck it up? So this seemed to be the nicest way to do it, in my opinion, is to neck it down and upset it. You get those radiuses, you get that face right where you want it, and then you're done with the face. You never have to touch it again. You hold the face and you do the rest of the forging. So, great, awesome. Am I ready? I like sorry, I'm not ready. There was a ruler. I need a pair of dividers. So let's get this 1.5 inches. I like a really sharp hot cut to cut through the material so that I'm not fullering the material in. So that's why I have my hot cut set up here. Got my hammer. Okay, I think I'm ready. Thank you, sir. So we'll just kind of line it up with my 1.5 inches right there. And I'm going to go ahead and go all the way around for this sort of situation. Where are we? Okay. Woo! Wow, ringy. Okay, so there's my 1.5 inches. So we'll take another heat and I'll start to neck this down. I didn't think I'd want a fire manager, but this is nice. You want to come home with me? Good question. I'm pretty sure I made this one out of mild steel and case hardened it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tend to use, like, in terms of tool steel and things like that, I keep a relatively relatively few kinds of tool steel in the shop in terms of in terms of knowing how to use it and knowing how to heat treat it. I don't end up using a lot of different kinds and no real fancy kinds. And my basic theory for this is that you should be able to use really simple tool steels and things like that to do a lot of work if the tool is made right, if the geometry is right. If you're working with hot metal, this isn't going to hold up if I am hammering cold metal over it. But as long as my metal's always really hot, then this can be made out of mild steel and be totally fine. So it's sometimes I think fancy tool steels and heat treating can foster bad technique because you can get away with more. Just my opinion. What's that?
Cover the case hardening later.
I don't have anything to do it with, but I can just tell you that I use Casonite, and it's is that what I use? Where do I get it? You can order it from any, like McMaster Car or wherever. Oh, maybe it's not Casonite then.
It's called like cherry red now or something.
Maybe I use cherry red because there's Casonite and cherry red. I guess maybe I use cherry red. Does caseinite not exist anymore?
No.
Okay.
Caseinite is better too.
Okay. I don't use caseinite. Doesn't exist anymore. So I use cherry red.
Oh, you had me excited.
Sorry. Thank you. So I'm just going to neck this down until it fits in the bolster, and I'm going to aim for a little bit more than half of the material. So I'm aiming a little bit more than halfway. Thanks. So this is a nice thing about the power hammer, is I can use it? I'm allowed? Sure, I'll give it a go. And so with the, I don't know what I was going to say with that, but. Case hardening. So with the case hardening, it's a hardening compound, and you just, like if I made this, then I would heat it up to a red, dull orange, and dip it in the hardening compound, and you heat it back up to that same color, and then quench it in water, and it makes a hard candy coating on the outside, so the interior is still that mild steel, which is pretty soft and forgiving, but the outside has I guess it's a carburized crust on it. Yeah. Well, if it's, no. I haven't done it to really big stuff. Usually I'm doing quite small stuff, so I haven't really had to deal with that. I don't know. I honestly don't know a whole lot about case hardening. I just use it for some pretty simple stuff. But I will use it for, I'll use it for my power hammer tooling. Like I'll use it for something like that, mostly. But it's pretty much just to prevent scale from getting slammed into the piece and making it all crusty and nasty.
Tutorial?
Yeah.
When you go to step down on this thing,
Uh-huh.
it doesn't run like a little giant.
Okay.
So you bring the ram about down to about halfway.
Uh-huh.
Lift your foot up, and it'll start to run. So you come down to about halfway.
Well, you bring it down halfway, then you lift up.
Try
Okay.
it. A little further down. Now lift your foot up just a little bit. Go ahead and take it.
So I have to go down halfway first before it? I can't just go into it?
Yeah, you can go down into it, but you
Oh.
just give it a good quick kick. So then you want
Okay. I'll figure it out, I think, I hope, I don't know. What's the worst that could happen? Whoa. All right, it got a little bit smaller, but a little quicker than I meant to. But I wanted to just barely fit in there. And I would have liked to left a little bit more up top there. Got away from me. But that's okay. It means we're going to have a chasing hammer with a long back end. So yeah, so this isn't ideal for me. I would cut this off and do it again. But I would like a little bit more material up there just so that I could upset more of a face and make it a little bit wider. So this will have a little bit smaller face with more material on the back end. That's all. And there's no reason to cut it off. I mean, there is reason to cut it off because we got to do the next step. 3/4? Question mark? Right. Oh, sorry, what? The bolster?
I think this is
No, I don't want to bottom out on the anvil.
Go over the hardy hole.
I'm going to go over the hardy hole when I do this. Yep, and when I use it on the hammer, then on the power hammer, I have a bolster, yep, on top of this, or under this.
Seth, I didn't hear the answer. Is the whole 3/4 inch your bolster? Is that what it is? Ish?
No, it's 5/8.
I think.
Yeah. It's whatever you want this to be.
Ready?
Yeah. Oh, actually, sorry. Could I have this? Could I have the heat back here to cut it
Sure.
off? Thanks. Yeah. Yes.
Do you use gas or coal for your?
So I use coal 98% of the time. Yep. Yeah, I do have a gas forge, but mostly just to heat up my lunch. Yeah, I use coal almost all the time. I really enjoy working in coal, and there's a big reason for that is because I am working on such small parts or thin parts that I want to be able to take really specific heats, and especially with some of the, like when we get into dividers, I want to be able to put that forging in there, forge a certain part of it, be done with it, and not put it back in any heat and have that part be done. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, come on. So this would be a step that I am saving by cutting it off beforehand instead of cutting it off the bar, because I would cut it on a bandsaw and I wouldn't have any sort of rag or anything like that. So that would be a reason to not do it off the end of the bar like this. But I want to make sure that I don't have anything that from that hot cut that I'm going to forge back into the face and create some sort of shut. Could I have a heat on just the face? So now we'll put it in that bolster, upset it, round out the face. Anything else about hammers? I make all my own handles. They're mostly made out of, no, not mostly, they're all made out of hickory. For the chasing hammer, it's particularly important. I think the chasing hammers are a nice hammer that I offer because chasing hammers, any other chasing hammer you buy, the handles are never thin enough. So as much as the heads are beautiful, I think the handles are equally as valuable in the ones that I sell. You want these thin handles to be able to flex for that to suck up and give you a little bit more whip when you're chasing.
What's your pricing?
Pricing, chasing hammers are $220, I think. Yeah, pretty sure. Yes, sir.
Do you saw or split your hickory? Do you saw or split your hickory?
I saw it. Yeah, I would love. I felled a hickory tree a couple years ago and have used it for a couple of my own hammers because it's just so labor intensive. So I end up sawing it. Yeah, I'll go to the thank you. Go to the lumber yard and look for, like, take a long time to select. Okay, got that face upset a little bit. And now I'm just going to go ahead and round it out. If it's a little bit slanting to one side, then I can kind of pull it. But you can start to see that those radiuses are exactly what I want, because that's coming from that die. And that's going to fit perfectly with the file that I'm going to use later on. Okay, let's take one more heat to clean this up a little bit more.
What weight hammer do you make the most?
Sorry?
What weight of hammer do you make the most?
Do I make the most? I've been mostly, the bench hammers that I make, which are around, one's that 350 grams, the other one's 275. And those have been really popular hammers for me, a lot in the woodworking community. A lot of people, I've gotten some press there, and a lot of people have really liked those for, driving chisels or holdfasts or things like that. They're my favorite hammers in the shop for my type of work, which is a lot of bench work, riveting, putting together small things, bending small things. But I think a lot of blacksmiths wouldn't really take to it necessarily in terms of the bench work, unless you do a lot of bench work. Like, it's not a good forging hammer necessarily. This is a slippery anvil. This face is a little bit off, as in it's off. Actually, maybe you can see it just like that, is that it's skewed off a little bit this way. Okay? So, yes, sir?
Set that out to the anvil.
Yeah, like here? Okay. Whoa, look at that. Okay. So the face is skewed off a little bit one way. That often happens, and I'll try and usually pick that as being the top, using that to be the top and bottom so that the hammer face would be skewed up and down if it needs to be. But I can also correct that with a little bit of filing or grinding later on. It's not a big issue. And this hammer doesn't have quite enough mass in the face that I'm going to try and pull that back or anything. But that's another thing, is I can upset that, or I can reforge this way to get it to come back out, and then when I'm upsetting in the bolster, can kind of pull that face one way or the other if I'm trying to reorient it. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's move on to punching this eye. So if you can go this way now and just kind of give me a heat in the body of the hammer. Thank you. So I've made these punches mostly out of 1045 or 4140. They're not heat treated or anything. And so then this is just a small slot punch to punch the eye, and I have a corresponding drift to go with it to be the eye shape that I want. With your punching and drifting, you always want you need corresponding punches and drifts, and you can easily kind of look at that by having them be the same shape this way. That way, when you're punching through, this is going to come in afterwards and be about the same size to completely fill up that void. You don't want a punch that's going to be much longer, and then when you put that shorter drift in, then you have these widow's peaks at the end that you're fighting with all the time. So you always want your corresponding punches and drifts to go together. A little warmer, thanks. So I also have a little bolster. It's got a little, I won't use this right off the bat, but it has this little rolled edge on it. This way I can put the hammer face right up onto here, and it's not going to damage that wider hammer face that's hanging down. I could also do that by, when I punch it, hanging that off the edge of the anvil, but I just find that this allows me to be up here, and as things move around, it's less likely to fall off the anvil. So I usually try and, I'll do this first and then I don't want to be over that hole. I'm just going to get established first. Make sure I'm in the middle here. Okay. So I usually try and line this up so that it is about, it's at the base of this radius that I've made from the bolster. That's just for this forging, that's how I like to line this up. And so now that I have it, I just kind of take that first heat to get it established. If I'm doing a bunch of these, I can get in the groove and usually get it and punch it in one go. But often I get that first heat, just get established, make sure I'm in the right place, and then as I go through this next time, I can really drive it home. With these much smaller punches and drifts, you got to be a little bit more careful about overheating them. And so I'll just be striking 2-3 times at the most and popping it out of there, and to keep it cool. I usually don't cool it in water or anything, but you totally could. Sometimes they get deformed, and as they get deformed, I will use the heat of right there to forge it back to the shape that I want, and then just keep punching as it cools down. There's no, if you look closely, is it easier for me to do this than to go like that? Okay, so if you look at the face of this punch, it doesn't have real crisp edges or corners. And I just find with punches, unless you're using a real hard material, then the corners always kind of end up dragging down a little bit, right here and right here, right? And I let that happen and then kind of reforge as I need to, and I find that it just kind of finds its own happy place and it ends up staying about there, and I never have any trouble punching through or shearing off or anything like that.
Is that part of the reason you don't harden your punches?
Yeah, because I mean, they just tend to, I don't know if it's my technique, but they always run the colors at some point, and I can punch without it. And again, it goes back to that. If you are punching with a cold tool through hot material, then it should hold up just fine. Give that a little tap to help it release. Flip it over. And I'm looking straight down at the cheeks. So now I'm looking straight down at that bulge that's coming out, and that's allowing me to line up this way, and then I can just look side to side to line up this way. And this is a bit too cold, but I can at least take this last bit of heat to kind of establish where I'm going to be on that side. I always set up before I walk back to the fire, or as my piece is heating, I always put things back where they need to be, so I'm ready to go right away.
Could you pass your bolster around if you're done with it?
Sure, yeah, definitely. It's a little warm, but not bad. That handle connection is one of my favorites from the Lilico book, where you just drill a hole and then use a center that's the same size as the handle you want, and use a center punch mark or two to peen it in or to hold it in. And especially with power hammer work, it gives that a little bit of flex, so it's not a welded handle that's super rigid. And so if things are off a little bit, that's gonna move or bend or wiggle instead of going right into your arm. So I'll go back through the first side to kind of cool that down a little bit, reestablish that. And then I can feel it release. Okay, so there we have our rectangular hole. There we have our gigantic slug. Look at that thing. It's a monster. Pass the slug around. Here. You can, it's cold. I hope. Okay, so now I have that hole punched, and I'll go ahead and start drifting it from both directions and start as I drive that drift through, the cheeks are gonna spread out, and so I'll start hammering them back in. Again, with the small stuff, you can't work very long. It's not like I'm gonna drive, forge, drive. It's in and out, like single or 1 or 2 hammer blows, and pop it back out.
When you do the radiuses on your bolster, do you just eyeball those until it's pleasing, or is there some technical?
Yeah, so the way I make them is I make a positive, so I punch that hole square the size I need it, and then I make this without the hole in it with the radiuses that I want, and then I heat the bolster up and drive that into it, and then. Yep. And then I'll go back in and clean up with files or, usually files to clean up. Yep. But I always find it's best to, instead of, and this is with all sorts of die, well, for the die work that I do, I find it's the best way to get there a lot of times is to make the piece that you want to make and then put it into the die. That really depends. I shouldn't even say that though, because it depends on complexity and things like that. But in this case, that's a really good use of that. We can pass these around too. I feel so fortunate I get to have this sample to show you guys because it cracked in heat treating. So, oh well, stuff happens. But this is the forging and then the just post heat treat. Let's see, so I need this little bolster. Now I'll move this bolster over the hardy hole and I'll move to my drift. And so drift is gonna go through and then I'm gonna hit twice. And see, I'm having it over this part of the anvil to keep the face off, and actually my anvil's facing the other direction, so I'm not like this. I'm actually, my hand's over on this side, so it clears it a little bit more. And then give it a tap on the back end, and that kind of upsets everything and helps the drift release. And then it's a little cool now, so I'll take another heat, but then flip it over and do it again. So I'll do this again and try and get 2 or 3 of those in that one heat. Here, sorry, can you flip that around? Yeah, thanks. So I'm always having him put it back end in first because that's what still needs to be forged. So I'm not in danger of overheating the face. Those edges are pretty thin now. I don't ever want to burn that, of course. But it's that whole kind of idea of you finish part of the forging and then try not to be putting it back into the fire. For making my drifts, these are made by forging a square taper and turning it into a round taper and then flattening that round taper. And that's how you get that oval tapered shape in both directions. And then there's usually a little bit of work on the grinder with files after that to get it to dial it in just right. And I don't have a number corresponding to this, but you want a drift that is not too aggressive or too steep, because then it becomes a lot harder for in the end, when you have an hourglass shape in your hammer eye, it becomes a lot harder to fill that with wood when you go to wedge it. So. Comes right out of there. Back in, the other side. Okay. And these eyes don't have to be very big. They're small hammers. So we're probably just about there anyway. Sometimes I'll kind of recorrect here as this. So now I'm just kind of, as those cheeks start to spread out top and bottom, I'll forge those back in. Yeah, I think this looks pretty good though. as I do larger batches of hammers, or if I'm doing a bunch of these at once, I will figure out how far I want that drift to go in, and then just take a chalk line and put it there. And then that way, as I drive the rest of the drift in on other hammers, and also as I drive the drift through the other side, I can know that it's in equidistant on both sides, because I like to have an even hourglass shape. Does that make sense with the hourglass? Okay.
Seth,
Yes?
you're not brushing. How do you deal with scale, or you're not getting scale?
No, there's scale forming. Oops. Look what you've done. There's scale forming. So as many of you have been here before, know Peter Ross. He's a good friend and a real mentor of mine. And I asked Peter the same question when I started working with him. And he said, well, I just forged it so there's not any scale on it. Oh, okay. I'll just do that then. And so this is a great example of something that I've come to learn through him in particular, and as always striving for is trying to take, and this is a little bit different because someone else is managing the fire, but I'm always trying to take hot heats, forging at higher temperatures at which the scale will be forming and blowing off, and then using a lower heat when there's not scale forming to refine it. And so I am trying to forge usually without producing too much scale, or when the scale produces it goes away, and then refining it. But for right now, and so that allows there to not be a lot of scale being driven into the metal and creating pockets and things like that. So that's my general theory there. Yeah, does that answer your question? So yes, in general, I don't usually brush things. Maybe right at the end, I'll give it a brush for that last thing to try and get some scale off. But before I file, I will often, a lot of things I'll throw in a bucket of vinegar overnight, and that will dissolve the scale, and that helps with filing. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when we do some file work. It tastes so good, yeah. I don't. So Pat Quinn was here last year, and he hates pickles so much. And when we set up a bucket of vinegar when I taught there, maybe they set it up beforehand, I don't quite remember, but he was just like, oh, I hate this so much, but it works well. And if you have a sandblaster, that's another great option if you don't like pickles as well. I don't have a sandblaster. All right, let's think about this. So this is pretty well finished up to this point, right? So now none of this has to go in the fire anymore. I mean, it all has to go in the fire because it's little, but I try and keep a nice, tight, small fire so just I can heat smaller parts. But now we need to draw out the peen. So I'll use a couple of fullers for this. These look massive, but this is the radius I want, so this is what I'm going to use. I have a fuller at home that is a much smaller tool with a large radius, but we're about to use this to make this. All right. And let's see, I want to get set up here. Would someone be willing to strike?
Yes.
All right. Let's go.
Oh, so we're striking.
Here, let me just get this set up so we're in the right way. And if there's kind of a top and bottom, because sometimes I like the look of it when a chasing hammer, I look at the look of it when a chasing hammer, if the face of the hammer is oriented a little bit high on the body, so it's a little bit tall, stylistically, I think that looks really nice. So sometimes I'll leave that. So if there is excuse me, sorry. If this chasing hammer if the face is skewed one way or the other, then I will pick that. Let's go this way.
Seth, why did they always have a ball on the end instead of a peen?
I've made chasing hammers with cross beams. Yeah, I don't know. And I've seen old chasing hammers with cross beams, a couple of them.
One peen, but
Yeah.
that's my favorite one.
I don't know why. Yeah, I've thought of making them with nothing on the end. I think Well, a ball peen versus a cross peen. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So we're gonna do. Let's see. We're gonna be over here. We're gonna use. Actually, this is gonna be kind of funny, isn't it? Let's see. I'm gonna have you stand over there if that's okay. Because we're gonna go back and forth here. We're gonna do a little bit of work right here and a little bit of work at the anvil. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fuller in the two sides this way, but then I just wanna fuller in, I just wanna fuller in the top that way. So I want it to have 3 fullers. So we'll fuller over here, like that, and then we'll move over here and fuller here.
Do this operation in your shop.
Under the power hammer with a spring swage and then a different just fuller, hand fuller. Yep. And actually we're gonna, let's just go at it with this. I don't think I own a hammer this heavy.
You come to my shop, I've got the biggest sledge anybody's ever seen.
Really?
47 pounds.
What?
The vinegar you use, is that household vinegar or is that industrial vinegar?
That is white vinegar off the store, off the shelf of the store. Yep. Thought about using balsamic, but it's a little expensive. Yeah. And then it tastes like when you have that salad and it tastes like iron. It's not really. Yeah.
Use that on the ones that put the gold plate on.
Right. Yeah. No, those are big money tools right there. That 10-year balsamic, scale free. This is all organic, isn't it? Kinda.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, sir. All right. Okay. Okay. Now let's move over here. Always flipping it back and forth and trying to kind of, ease into the form that I want.
Is that the weight you want of stripe?
Yeah, no, this is great. So let's go a little thinner on this. I think it'll look a little nicer if it's a little bit longer. Thank you. I'm making a mess here. Sorry, guys. Yes, sir.
Anytime you want to show something to
Yeah.
the audience, can you take a moment and pause and set it right there on the anvil and
Yep.
focus on it? Please, thank you.
Did you guys see this fuller? Staying warm back here?
Okay.
Get a couple of good ones. Great. Okay, light. I'm going to try and kind of sneak right back up to that eye a little bit. Blend it in. Light. Light. Lighter. 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 Great. Okay. So I'm looking for that as we talk about forging and scale and things like that. I'm looking for this I'm looking for that lower heat to actually be more of a planishing refinement. That's why I was saying lighter, lighter. And you can see that metal's like shining because it's doesn't have much scale on it, and it's now nice and smooth from the tool. I think we're all set. Thank you. So now I have that fullered in on two sides this way and on the top there. I'm gonna now round out that ball peen, unless you prefer a cross peen.
If it's going in the auction,
Do a cross peen? Yeah? All right. Have I made what? Like two upset faces? I've never seen that. All right. So one face is totally perpendicular to the body. The other face has some sort of slant to it. Wow. No, I've never seen that. Huh. And it's a chasing hammer? It's for you. Okay. Cool. I'm going to make a ball peen, sorry. This can just be right on the end of it. Okay. So now this is rectangular right now, so I'm gonna bring it back to square. And then octagonal. And then hit all the high spots. Okay, so that's nice and round for that ball peen. I will say that one thing I really like I really like production work because of this, because you get to see what happens after you do a lot, and you pick up on other things, and you either have mistakes or you just figure out stuff. One thing I really like about doing these on the hammer is that I do something early on that gives me a big heads up, a big step forward at this step, the last step, which is I forge super hard on that first forging I do to neck it down. Forge super hard, and that really pushes a bulge out of the end. And then I have a really nice rolled out ball of a cross peen when I get to this point. So like right now, this is pretty flat, and there's no real good way to, you might see other people do hammers where they're upsetting it into a dish bolster or something like that. This is such a small forging. There's no great way, and I don't think it's worth the time to try and forge a radius into that. I can do it with a grinder or a file so much faster. But doing that early step on the hammer really helps out now. So anyway, and so the last thing I'm going to do is, you can see this was this one has that hammer that I passed around has the ball peen. The ball peen actually comes down, so that's the last thing I do here, is I'm going to knock that ball peen down, because it just gives it a nice overall arc, and I think it's a little bit nicer for using and looks a lot nicer.
How often during your production runs do you reject a piece? Do you try to save any mistakes you do? Is there kind of a threshold for that?
I'll certainly reject a piece if it's, okay, I won't reject a piece if, like, I feel like I'm pretty good about making them all the same, even though I said I don't. And so, like, all those ones kind of fit into a certain amount of wiggle room. If there's something, I don't know, something happens, a big divot, or like on a cross peen, if it's real far off, or I don't know, I'm trying to think of a situation. But what I'll do is I'll actually I'll save that and put it aside and just make it into a different hammer. Maybe it has, and it often will get completely filed, like have full file work. So a lot of my other hammers, not these ones, but a few of the production ones, I leave forged surfaces on with just a little bit of file detail on some of the edges. Whereas if there's a mistake on it and I can file that out, I'll actually make that into a fancier hammer. So the mistakes sometimes turn into nicer pieces. So I don't know if that answered your question, but All right, so last thing I'm gonna do here is knock this peen down with this, I guess. What is this? This is definitely the weirdest hammer I've ever used. Okay, that's all I needed to do. Actually, that's not true because it's a little, could I have your real light strike here? So it's bent one way, really, really light. Little, one more time. One more time. Great. So that just bent off one way a little bit, so I straightened that. But I just knock that down, knock that peen down, and I usually use a wooden mallet or a rawhide mallet because I don't want to damage the top of that peen. Okay? So the last thing I'll do with this hammer is heat it up to critical temperature, to non-magnetic, and then I'll let it cool slowly in vermiculite to give it an anneal. I just got a new heat treating oven, which I'm excited about. It isn't wired up or anything, but I'm excited to use that a little bit more for some of this stuff. Probably be doing, put it aside at this point and then doing an annealing cycle after that. Okay, for good measure. Make it look nice and fancy. All right, so that's the finished forging. Do you mind just heating this up to a dull orange?
Do what?
Heat it up to like the whole thing up to a dull orange. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Along the lines of like production and quality control, are there specific stages that you're evaluating all the hammers, or are you kind of evaluating them together throughout as you're running your production run? Or like,
I'm laughing because I feel like my evaluation is, oh, these are not good. These are not good. God, this batch is really bad. This is not gonna cut it. And then I like file them, or they gets to that last step. I'm like, oh, these look good. So that's my quality control, is me being really critical the whole time and then usually pretty happy in the end. One thing I do kind of along those lines though, which I really didn't enjoy production for a while until I found my own way to do it, and I have certain things, so I'll do certain things to certain steps. So a lot of times when I forge these hammers, I'll just neck it down and upset the faces on all of them, and then I'll punch all the eyes, and then I'll do all the fullering on the end. And that, yeah, no, we're good. That's done.
Okay.
No, I mean, yeah, we'll just put it,
Okay, cool.
yeah, put it in here.
No, let's put it over here in the corner there.
Well, I want it to cool real slow.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Just don't let it go down.
Wait, where's it gonna go? Is it gonna go? Yeah, so I found my own way of doing production that I really like. So same thing with the dividers. Like those steps that I have that storyboard there. Those are more or less the steps that's not totally true. I usually bring them to like, oh man, we're all screwed up here. I usually bring them to like this point, to a point that makes sense. Oh no, that goes there. This goes here. Yeah, I usually bring them to a point that makes sense for stopping and then move on. And so that's a really good time for me to see, oh, this one is way off in the batch. And so let's put this aside. And I usually do when I do, so last batch of dividers I did, I was aiming for, I forged 36 pair of dividers, knowing that I would be happy if I ended up with, I ended up with 28, and that was totally fine. But that was just because I knew that I was aiming for more than 2 dozen. So I forged 36 knowing I was gonna lose maybe four in the process because there were some extras that, like somewhere along the way, they weren't gonna cut it. Yeah.
When those don't cut it, do you save them for the next batch? To see
It depends why they don't cut it. Yeah. Yeah, if there's something real wrong with them, then they're real.
I've been calling you Dr. Seth. Do you line it up in that surgical line for the picture, or do you always work that angle?
I work that way, Scott.
You can throw things at it.
It's the right way. Yeah, no, and so I have a real small shop, and well, I was like this anyway, but I keep a clean shop. Now that I have a smaller shop, I keep a cleaner shop because I can't have stuff everywhere. I can't. So I definitely need to keep things in order. And when I put something down, I just usually put it down next to the one next to it, the same distance. Is that a problem? And it makes a nice picture, don't it?
That's why I call you Dr. Seth. It's a surgeon's line. It's just.
Well, did you, okay, so I got a couple comments on that. Did you also notice that it's a surgical cloth underneath? Okay. My wife's a nurse, so I get some nice shop rags every once in a while. Did you have a question?
Well, I just, and welding, but like, if I haven't done a welding process for a long time and I want to do a critical welding process, say in settling, I'll practice for 2 hours before I
Sure.
get into it. If you've been away from, say, making these hammerheads for 6 months,
I always make
how long
one.
does it take you to get back to where you're saying, okay, I'm ready to go into production?
Oh, I usually make one and then I go into production. Yeah, yeah. So same thing with dividers. I almost always make a pair of dividers all the way through. Well, all the way through the forging. I know that I can do the rest. So I almost always make whatever I'm making all the way through. That's half because I have a terrible memory. And I don't, what size did I use? And I've gotten a lot better about writing down, giving good notes on the starting stock, but yeah. So, okay, any other questions before we move on to a different tool about hammers in general, or?
I missed what type of steel you started with.
It's 1045, yeah. And yeah, I don't think there's, so I think, well, we'll just see how the weekend goes, but I would hope that I'd maybe get this file to the point that we can do a little heat treating on it too. If we're not gonna get to heat treat it, I'll certainly talk about the heat treating before this is all up. Is that okay? Great. So why don't we move on to dividers? Dividers, so here's a pair of my dividers. I made these years ago, and as a production piece, and this is my standard pair of production dividers and what they look like after 4 years of use almost every day, and wire brushing every once in a while, or cleaning them up. Things rust really, really badly in the mountains of North Carolina. This pair I actually didn't. I've just been kind of wire brushing and letting it take its course, and you can see they're much rustier. But I've made, for a while, I was making a set of, you could buy a set of dividers, inside calipers and outside calipers, or each one together, but it really didn't seem to go over that well, and so I mostly just sell dividers, make outside calipers every once in a while. Nobody wants inside calipers, I guess. But the dividers are really interesting forging, in my opinion. I learned these from Peter. I'll talk a little bit more in my slideshow about it, but I got to work with Peter for a couple months very regularly, and he's been a huge inspiration in the type of work that I do, and I mean, he's such an incredible smith, as any of you who know him know, and has always is that bar that I hope to reach at some point. You never know. But he's just, so anyway, he taught me how to do this forging. He makes very traditional dividers, because that's what he does, is traditional colonial work. And so I kind of took these to my own, and it's very much the same format, but I found a little bit different pattern that I thought was nice, and a little bit different style of file work. And so let's get started on a pair of these. So let's do the first half first. I think I might do the fire for this one, just because it's...
Do what?
Do you mind if I do the fire for this one?
Go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah. It's just a little bit, I don't know, it's a little bit fussier in terms of specifics of where I want my heat. Is this just my, is this? Oh, okay. Do you just turn it on and off usually? Use the gate? Okay.
Pushing it in gets it more air.
Oh, okay, great. It's the opposite of mine. That should be good. All right, just a little more heat. Oh! All right. So the first half of these are going to start with 1/4 by 1/2 inch stock. And unlike the hammers, which I pre-cut, all my blanks for because I need this mass of material, I think it's much more efficient to forge this off the end of the bar for a few reasons. One, because when you screw up that first step, you haven't sacrificed the whole 5 inches or whatever it's going to take to make this, and you can just cut off that inch and be done. And also, it's just, I guess that's the main reason. That's the main reason for doing it. Oh, can I use this side? Is that? Oh, there we go. Oh, great. And this is also the way I stand at my forge, so this is better. Thank you. It's not working. I know. Oh, geez. Yeah, but I got to get used to that side already. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we'll take about an inch off the end of this. Let's see, that looks like a good spot on the anvil. First part is to shoulder down. Now we're going to move here to a 45. Okay, so now we have, I've shouldered here, and then I've moved over here at a 45-degree angle, and I have that 45, so I have this 90-degree V I'm looking at this way. Okay, so that's the first 2 steps.
Are you guys estimating by eye how much stock you're going to need there?
Yeah, I've done a few at this point, so I started measuring them when I first started.
Are you making the center leaf?
This is the 2-leaf side. This is this side. 1/4 by 1/2. Okay, so now, because these have a little bit of a boss at the top, I'm going to use the cross peen and spread that material to give me a little bit more up top here. Okay? Start to flatten the whole thing and kind of start to correct things. So I'm using this lower heat where it's not scaling or anything to really get a nice, flat, even surface on the inside of that leaf, because that's really important for this forging, because ultimately that's going to become a bearing surface in these. Okay, so an important part of these is that you want this part of the leaf, you want the leaf to be equal in thickness all the way through. You don't want it to taper this way, you don't want it to taper that way. It can taper top to bottom if need be, but you don't want tapering front to back because it will end up binding in the end because there'll be thicker parts and thinner parts. So I'm looking for even thickness front and back here. Okay. So that's one half. And I'm also looking at, I need a good pointer. I'm not going to use that. I'm also looking at this here to here. I want this to be about half the thickness of that. Sorry. Which way should I point this? It's fine? Okay. Yeah, so I want the full width of the leaf. I want at the neck where it's neck down to be half the full width of the leaf, okay? And if anything, no, it should be actually a little bit bigger because I can always refine that and bring it a little bit smaller further in the forging, but right now I want it to be about half, if not a little bit thicker. Okay.
Seth?
Yes.
I couldn't see from here, the face that will be the making face to the other half, you had that on the anvil when you were forging?
I did, yeah. Yeah, I had that on the anvil because I was able to give it a nice, I'm able to get that shoulder down there, right? And also the anvil is going to leave a dead flat surface. So even if my hammer blows were off a little bit on the top and left a dent, then it's not going to show up, on the back side. Now let's remember how long we cut this off at. Look at these good notes that I take to try and remember these things. Yeah, cut it with 4 3/4. So this is where I do use numbers and measurements, but they're usually based off of certain points in the forging. So I'm going to cut this off at 4 3/4 from that shoulder mark, not from the top of the boss. And I picked that. Any ideas why I picked that? Why I picked to cut it off 4 3/4 from here? This is another nice reason to have storyboards, is I could have just gone like this and not had a number. I forget that sometimes. Any reason why I would measure it from here and not from up here? Yeah, this can be, I actually don't really care what this is. It can be long, short, it could have a big burr on the end, it could be square, it could be whatever, but this is my new standard point that I'm going to go for. And so it's kind of this walking the line between being really precise with the forging and then just knowing, I'm always getting as close as I can, but I'm going to base it off like the last accurate point. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's cut this off. Done with these. I did make this pair of tongs, which is kind of a nice specialty pair of tongs that are kind of a box jaw, but they should fit this just right. And so this is another thing just kind of like in my forging, is that I know that in terms of quality control and things like that, is that I know that if I got these so that fit around this, that pretty much fit right around this boss, then that's the width I'm looking for, And they also have this shorter bit on this end so that it doesn't interfere. So it holds it nice and far up on the back side, on the outside of the leaf, but it doesn't interfere with that shoulder in there. So now I'll do the same thing on the other side, but it's a mirror image. So just Got to keep that in mind. So nice, really hot heat to get the metal where I want it to go. So this time I'm turning the opposite way. That one's always the bugger. Okay, so when you get those steps, you can do that in one heat. This one's always this one's always the bugger when you get a little bit too far that way and knock the head off the wrong direction or put a big dent in it, and yeah, it's fixable, it's fine. Okay, so now I have this mirror image of the two halves, and what I want to do is I want to score it on this side of it so I can fold it that way, and I'll weld that leg together and draw it out. Okay. This is one thing that I definitely eyeballed a bunch of times, and it didn't seem to work as well as I'd like it to every time. And so I've started kind of giving myself a little bit of a guide to find the middle of that. I eyeball a lot of stuff, but that one, when you get it off, it's just it's pretty annoying to finagle around. All right. Are there any flat tongs around that would just be kind of like,
Flat tongue?
yeah, flat that touch?
One right in there.
Like this?
No, if you were at the end or what?
No, I think that could work. These could work. These will be fine. Yeah, one's like these, but it would be a little bit tighter. No, those don't close enough. That's okay, these will work. Yeah, I think these will be okay. All right, so I can kind of just, if I go from one side and then the other, the difference between those lines is the middle. And I'm just kind of scraping off the scale there, right? Even though I can't really see what I just did. And I obviously couldn't see what I just did because it was in the wrong place. Okay, so this is the issue here is that these have lined up poorly. Can you see that? Can we see inside of that? Tip it up like that. So these have lined up poorly, those two shoulders. So now I'm going to take a heat on the end here and push one, which is not ideal, but it's totally fine. Because blacksmithing is just a constant correction of mistakes, isn't it?
It's nothing very constant.
Oh, cool. Yeah, these are great. Thank you. All right, so I just got to kind of get this. By leaving the longer side on the anvil, it's staying a little bit cooler and it's not moving as much, although it's forging a little, and I'm able to hammer the top and get that to stretch out a little bit more, and now I have those two shoulders lined up pretty well. Pop that open, throw a little flux in here. Okay. Now we'll weld these. So we want a nice, pretty clean fire for welding with not any green coal in it or anything like that. I'm not gonna blast the heck out of this thing. I wanna just come up nice and evenly. I wish you guys could see this, but I have it so this is back to that overheating thing, is I don't want to heat the heck out of those leaves, right? Because those are nice, have nice surfaces on the inside of them and everything. So I'm trying to keep those leaves on the periphery of the fire, yet still get a welding heat all the way up to that shoulder. So it's kind of it's kind of fussy to get it in there and get it just right, but that's what I'm aiming for here. Make sure I'm all cleaned off here. Okay, I'm going to weld. And a lot of times I will stop, if I'm cruising here, I'm just going to put it in the vise and kind of straighten that leaf so it's not getting moved all over the place. A lot of times I will take 2 heats to do this weld. And almost all the antique dividers you see, you always catch a little glimpse of that crack. And you can see that weld in almost all my work. And I'm not concerned with it being perfectly tight and being this perfect joint. I actually really like that it's that sort of detail. But I do want to get that weld up as nice and far. So I'll often stop right there before I get to the next step of the forging and just take another welding heat to make sure that I can get that weld all the way up into there. Would someone mind grabbing me some water? Thanks. He beat you to it. Getting that weld right up in that corner there. Thank you so much. Okay, so now I'm really looking at that one, that halfway. Here, this will help me say that clearer if I wasn't before, is that I want that thickness to be half of this, right? So I want that's what that thickness is. I want it to be rectangular. This should be about 3 inches long. And this is all just for this specific forging of dividers. And I'll just kind of wiggle these around a little bit to get them to be in the right spot. And I'm also looking at the space between the space that will be the single leaf in the dividers. And I want that to be about there. You know, it can be a little bit larger because we're going to forge this around the other piece once it's formed. But I'll stop there for that forging and now do the other one. So this is a good example in production work. I forged this half to this point on all of them and then put it aside. So now let's do the other half to that point, because then they need to get put together. So we'll use 1/2 inch round for that. So I'm using 1/2 inch round because it's going to get me to this forging easier. If I were to use, say, so say if I split the difference between 1/4 by 1/2 and 1/2 inch round, that would be maybe like 3/8 inch square that I could potentially get both of those forgings out of, but I really couldn't. It wouldn't be easy to get either of those out of either of those forgings. And so I'm picking this because it gets me that shape easiest, and then this gets me that single leaf easiest. 1/2 inch square is more material. Yep. So right, if a circle is inside a square, it's going to be a little bit more material. So it's a nice way to be able to adjust just a little bit when you're figuring out forgings or developing forgings, is to say, oh, that was a little bit too much material, but the next size down in square is not enough. So let's pick the round size just under that. 20%?
Any given round is 20% smaller than the square, or 80% of the square.
So this half is actually, well, both halves are a little bit challenging because one has forge welding, it's mirrored, all that. This one's a little bit challenging as well because you have all those steps, but then instead of doing these single shoulders on each half, I'm going to be doing a double shoulder, so I need to have some good hammer control to be able to neck that in at both sides. So it's about the same amount of material, about 1 inch off the end. That shoulder's the same, and just knock that back, and then I come in and gotta do this double shoulder. Okay, so get that necked in both ways there, and it always gets mucked up a little bit. I'm not perfect. And so, you know, if I have to readjust, then I come over here and I can hit the high spot there to knock the shoulder back and get a little bit more mass on one side or the other. Okay? How are we doing for time? Is it, what, 9:30? Okay, hour and a half. With tool steel, you can't do this because of burning out the carbon, but for mild steel, I bring my work to pretty much a welding heat, way above a welding heat every time. I bring it to a bright yellow so that metal is as malleable as it can possibly be without burning. Then I'm going to go ahead and spread out that boss. Start to form up this part of the neck. And I kind of go back and forth. That's where we're looking at. You can still see I have hammer marks in there from the crossbeam, so I'll want to get those out. But in terms of lining up, this is another point at which I'm kind of looking at what were we talking about? When I throw things out, is I'm looking at the other half. And I'll just do 2 halves of these, and usually there's some that are, you know, a little bit, there's 2 that are a little bit large and 2 that are a little bit small, so I can match those all up. But I'm looking, if I'm just doing 1 pair, then at this point I'm holding this up and going, yep, that looks like it's about the right width. Whoop, you screwed that one up, Seth. Cut that one off, do it again. I don't actually talk to myself in my shop very much. Ooh, you're doing a good job, Seth. So, good example of heat, and what I'm looking for, I don't need a ripping hot heat right now because I pretty much just need to get those hammer marks out. That's all I'm really concerned about with this heat. That looks good. I think it's a little long, but I'm not going to worry about it because it's fine. Okay, so this is this to this point. So now I'll cut this off the bar and draw out that leg. Yeah, so I want the center leaf to be thicker than my 2 outside leaves. That's for functional purposes, is you want that single leaf to be stronger than the 2 outside leaves which are binding it. It's just like a hinge. When you have hinges, a lot of times the leaf that has more knuckles on it are going to be, the knuckles will be thinner than the leaf that has a single knuckle or there's 2 to 3 or whatever. Nah, I mean, not quite. Yeah, thicker. Yeah, close to twice as thick. I wouldn't go thicker than twice as thick, but yeah, it doesn't have to be either. They can be pretty close. What am I doing? I'm cutting it off at 2 inches. Or I'm walking to here and going like that. I really enjoy the efficiencies, learning to be more efficient when doing production work. Like in this instance, every heat, trying what else can I get done in this heat? Is there something I can get, you know, can I get a little bit further to cut all this down to as few heats as possible? Yeah, it's always, I always like that challenge. Like right there, if I had had my power hammer, I probably would have pushed it and forged out that leg right there because there's a little bit of heat, and I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily do it by hand, but. kind of a little correction to get things back in line. So now I'm looking for the same length. This one's a little bit longer, but the mass looks about right, so I'm not going to stretch this one out anymore. If anything, I can just nip the end off that before I draw both legs out. So the next thing I'm going to do, we're done for this right now, and I'm going to let these cool down and do a little bit of filing on them, and then mate them together so they're a perfect match. Yeah, here we can kind of look at the thickness there in terms of being twice the thickness or whatever it is. You know, it's not, I wouldn't say it's quite twice the thickness, but it's close. Any questions so far?
Do you ever make them with 5 leaves?
I've made one pair.
Is there any reason for doing that?
I think my guess would be, and I shouldn't even guess at this because I don't have the background to do so, but that maybe it's more of a gimmick, it's like a, you know, when they were being mass produced, it would be, well, the 3-leaf divider, where you get the 5-leaf divider, you know, more bearing surfaces, more even, you know, I have one pair of them. I have one pair of old ones that's a wing divider. I wouldn't say it is particularly a better joint than the rest, but I don't have many examples, so. It was a pain in the butt to do. That made it less fun. Okay, this is my cool one. So I'm gonna do a little file work on here. Let that kind of cool down. Whew. Trick is getting it in the vise while it's still hot, right? Whew. Not really, I could cool this down. I'm being foolish. Excuse me, I'm gonna grab a couple files. So I don't have a gauge out here or anything like that, but basically what I'm doing is I'm filing to make this be nice and flat and even and make this be about a 45-degree angle. And I want that angle to start at the base of the shoulders on the interior. Does that make sense? If it was this way, then if my 45-degree angle started too far this way, then I'd have like a step up into that nook in there, and that wouldn't allow the other leaf of the divider to go all the way to the bottom of it as they mate together this way. So that's where I want that to start. Sometimes I will, if they're real far off or something like that, I might go in there with a thin file, a warding file, or I have a hacksaw that's always set up with 2 hacksaw blades stacked up to make a thicker kind of blade, and I'll go in there and hog a little bit of material out. And I'm essentially going to do the same thing on this side. And then I also want to file these shoulders so that they're nice and crisp. If I hold this here, is that fine? You guys can see right here. So I'm looking for those shoulders to come down and meet at the same spot down here, for it to be about a 45 that way. Or I'm sorry, like this V would kind of make a 90, 45 from here. But it's definitely more than a 90. I'm not gonna fix it, that's totally fine for this. This shoulder needs to come down a little bit more. So I will push it this way. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. And let's see how they look next to each other. So if I can kind of get an idea of what's going to happen if I just kind of lock them in like that. I can see that for the thickness of my legs, these leaves are a little bit wide, which is going to create some overlap when I put them together, and I'm going to need to hammer going that way, and that's going to muck things up. So I'm just going to take a little bit of material off of the outside of these leaves. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. I think that'll come together nicely.
Seth, is there a reason why you're doing those two pieces separate, not marrying them together when you have them in the device to file them?
Right now? Because all I care about right now, because these are going to get hot again. Things are going to move around again. Yeah, so I'm just getting the part that needs to go together right now. Now I'm going to heat them up, forge them together. I'll do that at the end. Open that up so it'll fit in there. And so now I'm going to heat this. Go ahead.
This point, this is where you're matching that angle also.
Yeah, close. Not exact, but.
So, yeah, because all the way through, you're eyeballing that 45, but you're just matching them now. And whatever it is.
Yeah, whatever it is. If they're both 45-ish, then it's gonna get forged. Things are gonna kind of squish around. So it'll kind of just mate together pretty well. If you're way off in opposite directions, then it's probably not gonna come out as well. But again, it's like not again, I haven't said this yet, is that I'm always trying to train my eye. I'm rarely working with on certain work I work with precision stuff. With this stuff, I'm just always trying to get it as close as I can so that I can look at that and say, that's a 45-degree angle, and it'll be close enough. Okay, so now we're going to heat this one up, and this one's going to be cold, and we're going to slip this around here and forge it around this, and this is going to kind of act as like an anvil for this one to form around. So then you make a perfect match between the two. And that's like, we have those shoulders in there that are not crisp right now, so like that's going to act you know, as those hammer together, that's going to help crisp up those shoulders. This is going to help go around that. So that's why you want all of these inside surfaces to be really smooth so they come together really well and there's not a divot or a bump pushing one thing or another that then is going to make a binding joint.
And you don't file those surfaces at all?
Not if I've forged them well. Yeah, at this point, if you had surfaces that were pretty buggered up, then I would file the heck out of them and make them nice and smooth. Yep.
Does the scale on there affect the joint when it all goes together?
It usually kind of, if there's any in there, kind of grinds out of there a little bit, but no, it's usually not too bad. Yeah, yeah. Again, I usually throw them in vinegar and dissolve stuff, and yeah. All right, so this is going to go here. We're going to put these in. Those leaves are real thin. They can burn up really easily. So at this point, I put it in with the leg going first, even though all I really care about is the heat on the leaves, just to try and give myself a little bit more of a chance of not burning the leaves. I realized that no one did my makeup before you guys turned on the camera. Am I going to look okay? There's only one thing you can do. Make it a little less. So at this point, I am heating these up pretty well because I want that heat to be able to form it around. So kind of getting that to form around that single leaf. Ooh. Okay, so that joined them pretty well, but I always take another heat and then now forge them both together. With the thinking being that the interior was nice and flat, you forge those nice flat surfaces to that cooler interior. Everything should be nice and even. As long as I don't like hit the crap out of it in one weird angle or another, then it's still going to stay really even and help it just kind of come together a little bit more. Okay. I'll also, during this heat, during this heat, I'll also, you can see one head of these heads are kind of off a little bit, so I'll put it in the vise and try and kind of knock those in so they line up a little bit better. Sure, why don't we get to, let me take a couple, we'll work till 10, is that fine? That's fine. Okay, yeah, let me get to a certain point on this forging, and then I think it'll make sense to take a break. Or I would be I think it'll be good. I also usually do this step under the hammer with nice flat even dies, and everything just comes together really even. Yeah, and I don't want to be stressing that the hammer is like the solution to anything, because you can do it at the anvil just as well, but there are certain steps that it's just like no question that's going to be flat. It's going to bring it down everything really evenly. I like the hammer for that step. I'm afraid to use this hammer for it because I think I'll overdo it. I'm not sensitive enough to this, so. Because I basically just want to be kissing it. These in the vise and can kind of knock that way, and that way. Okay, so these are, you know, they still are off a little bit here, but it's fine. I can see there's enough material on either side to round out, give me a little bit more on either side to round out, and it's not much material to remove. So at this point, what I do is I need some dividers for my dividers. Well, I can do it off of these, is I'll go from the top here, and measure where I want my half round legs to start. And I will, where'd those go? I'll measure down from the top here to give myself an idea where I want that. I'm gonna do it from there. Or I can just, you know, eyeball this if it's whatever dividers I want. And I'm actually just hitting on, I'm not digging in. I'm just giving myself a little bit of kind of a witness mark to be able to know where to start the taper for that forging and have those legs end up the same. Because now I'm going to pull them apart, forge both legs, put them back together, then the forging's done. Okay, I think maybe we'll take a break now, and I'll forge the legs after the break. Okay, thanks.